And Wharton tonight, Loose Women star and voice of the people, Carol McGiffin, will give her no-nonsense, common-sense take on the world in Uncancelled. US talk radio firebrand and California governor candidate Larry Elder discusses the culture wars on both sides of the Atlantic and the Republicans' route back to the White House. Plus, positive professor Carol Sikora is here to dispel the COVID doom and gloom promoted elsewhere in the mainstream media. GB News star Neil Oliver returns as the outsider, and I'll bring you a first look at the front pages with my superstar panel, crown the day's greatest Britain and Union Jackass, and debate a topic important to you in The Clash. That's Dan Wharton tonight from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So good evening and welcome to Dewbs and Co with me, Nana Akua. I'm here standing in for Michelle. So on today's show, as we learn that a heroic taxi driver foiled an act of terror and that 4 others have been detained under the Terrorism Act, is it time that we got tougher on terrorists? COVID passports are now required in Wales, so before we can get set foot in venues like theatres and cinemas, you'll have to show your pass. Is this a bit over the top, or do you welcome the idea? Some say they feel coerced into taking a vaccine, but in any case, why would you need to be? Surely it's the right thing to do. Tesco seem to think so. Their latest ad features a vaccinated Santa. Would you boycott the store in protest? And in an act that can only be described in my eyes as woke liberalism, Cambridge University's Wolfson College have introduced mandatory anti-racism workshops. Words like supremacy, privilege and whiteness rear their ugly heads, but do things like this actually create the very thing that they're trying to prevent? And remember Prince Harry whinging, you can all remember that, whinging that he had to spend his last millions that his mum left him and that his dad had stopped his payments. In his words, they literally cut me off financially. When is the right age to stop accepting handouts from the bank of mum and dad? That's coming up. So with me tonight throughout the show, comedian Francis Foster, the CEO of Federation of Award-Winning Bodies, Tom Buick, and both journalist and campaigner Julie Bindel. All of that to come tonight, but first, let's get your latest news headlines. You're watching GB News, your latest news headlines.
The terrorism threat level in the UK has been increased to severe, meaning an attack is highly likely. It follows yesterday's car explosion at Liverpool Women's Hospital. Officers believe they've now identified the passenger who detonated an improvised explosive device in the cab, killing himself. The taxi driver, David Perry, escaped with minor injuries, and he's now being praised for his actions after saying he'd locked the car moments before the explosion took place. 4 people have been arrested under anti-terrorism legislation, and a controlled explosion has also been carried out at Sefton Park as a precaution and as part of the ongoing investigation.
It is a stark reminder of the need for us all to remain utterly vigilant. What yesterday showed, above all, is that the British people will never be cowed by terrorism. We will never give in to those who seek to divide us with senseless acts of violence, and our freedoms and our way of life will always prevail.
Meanwhile, a police cordon has been placed around the address where the taxi driver David Perry picked up his passenger. Police say significant items were found during a search of that property. A second address is also being searched, we understand.
Our inquiries have led us to 2 addresses. The first was Sutcliffe Street in the Kensington area of Liverpool, and at this location 3 men aged 21, 26 and 29 were arrested yesterday under section 41 of the Terrorism Act. Again in the Kensington area, a further man aged 20 was arrested under section 41 of the Terrorism Act.
Well, away from events in Liverpool, the COVID-19 vaccine booster programme has been extended now to people over the age of 40. The Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation is saying people over 40 should be offered a booster 6 months after their second jab. 16 and 17-year-olds are also being encouraged to come forward for a second Pfizer jab. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, urging everyone now to take the vaccine.
It would be an utter tragedy if, after everything we've been through, people who had done the right thing by getting double vaccinated ended up becoming seriously ill or even losing their lives because they allowed their immunity to wane by not getting their booster. And if you haven't even had 1 dose, it's not too late. In fact, there's never been a better time to get that vital protection as we head into winter.
Meanwhile, a judge in northeast Lincolnshire has ruled a 12-year-old boy can be vaccinated despite his mother's objection. He's living in council care at the moment. It's been concluded that a local authority can arrange and consent to his flu and COVID-19 jabs. The judge said in his written ruling this is the first case of its kind. Austria is putting unvaccinated citizens into lockdown to slow the spread of coronavirus in the country. Anyone aged 12 and over who hasn't had the jab is now banned from leaving their homes except for work, food shopping, exercise or to get the vaccination itself. The measures are now in force and will last at least 10 days. Here, 12 children and 1 adult have been taken to hospital following a ceiling collapse at a school in South London. Around 20 firefighters and 3 fire engines were called into Rosemead Prep School in Dulwich after the incident in a Year 3 classroom. The school's chairman of governors confirmed there were no life-threatening injuries.
This has been a worrying time for the children involved, their families and the wider school. We understand from initial examinations that there were no concerns regarding the rest of the building, and we will work with the authorities regarding any investigations to be undertaken.
In the United States, former Trump advisor Steve Bannon has surrendered to the FBI after being indicted on 2 counts of contempt. That's after he defied a congressional subpoena from the committee investigating the US Capitol riots. The Justice Department said 1 count was for refusing to appear for a deposition, the other for refusing to provide documents. If Bannon is convicted, he faces up to 2 years in jail. And His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales' 73rd birthday has been marked today with a 41-gun salute. Take a listen. That was in Green Park. There it goes. Carried out by the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. In the centre of London, the pandemic meaning it's the first time in nearly 2 years that a public gun salute has been staged in a royal park. You're up to date. I'm back in an hour.
So good evening, I'm Nana Akua. You're with me till 7 and I've got my fabulous panel joining me. Comedian Francis Foster. Also the CEO of the Federation of Award-winning Bodies, Tom Buick, and both journalist and campaigner Julie Bindell. And I also want to know your thoughts throughout the show. Get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or send me a tweet at Nana Akua1, that's NANAAKUA1, or at GB News. Now, the issue of terrorism has reared its ugly head again today after authorities in Liverpool confirmed that the explosion outside the women's hospital yesterday was carried out by an extremist. 4 people have now been arrested after a taxi blew up in the moments before the country fell silent for Remembrance Sunday. Let's get the latest from our Home and Security editor, Mark White, who's in Liverpool. Mark, the driver of the taxi is being hailed a hero today.
Yes, he is. An indication coming from friends and colleagues within the taxi industry here in Liverpool that his actions may have prevented a much more significant tragedy, that this driver had locked the doors to the back of the taxi, preventing this bomber from leaving that minicab and heading into the hospital proper. Not confirmed by the authorities, but certainly that is what local taxi drivers here in Liverpool are saying this evening. As far as the investigation is concerned, 4 young men remain in police custody this evening, being interviewed by counter-terrorism detectives. And just within the last hour and a half, a controlled explosion has been carried out at Sefton Park, which is just a mile from where I am. I've been looking back at the events today in this fast-paced investigation. It's just before 11 a.m. on Remembrance Sunday. As the nation pauses to remember its war dead, this security camera captures the moment a taxi pulls up at the front of Liverpool Women's Hospital. Moments later, an explosion. As smoke pours from the taxi, the driver, David Perry, can be seen staggering from the vehicle, thankfully with only minor injuries. In the back of the cab, as it's engulfed in flames, a man who police now believe was a bomber, who brought his explosive device into the taxi. It's not clear what any intended target was, but police say he asked the driver to take him to the women's hospital. A memorial service was also taking place nearby. The explosion has now been formally declared a terrorist incident.
Following discussions with Army Ordnance Disposal, we are able to confirm that this is being treated as the ignition of an explosive device. Our inquiries also indicate that the device was brought into the cab by the passenger. We believe we know the identity of the passenger, but we cannot confirm this at this time.
The taxi driver, who's now been released from hospital and is recovering at home, has been hailed a hero. Away from the scene of the explosion, police raided 2 residential addresses and made 4 arrests. Those arrested under the Terrorism Act are still in police custody today, being questioned by counter-terrorism detectives who are trying to piece together information about the suspect and his movements prior to the explosion. At Rutland Avenue, around a mile from the hospital, there is still a heavy police presence. A mobile police command unit has been set up at the end of the street as a property linked to the dead suspect is searched. Neighbours told us of their shock at the unfolding events.
You don't really see stuff around here like that. I think it's a bit mad wherever you live. You see things like this, isn't it? You don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, it's a bit clueless.
Even the police just said they don't really know what's going on.
Well, the other police at that side said there was a manhunt.
Police and security services are now urgently trying to establish whether there is any wider threat to the public. They've said they've discovered significant items at the Rutland Avenue address and are likely to be involved in a prolonged search of that property. Mark White, GB News, Liverpool. Well, the Prime Minister today chaired a meeting of the government's Crisis Cabinet Committee, the COBRA committee, that was at the same time that the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre was deciding, in the view of those analysts, that the terror threat level should be raised to its second highest level. That is severe, meaning that a terror really follows the fact that there was 2 terrorist incidents now in the space of a month. The murder of Sir David Amos in Essex last month, and then this attack on Sunday. The public will notice an enhanced police presence at key locations in major urban population centres around the country.
Well, thanks, Mark, for that. So we'll keep you updated with that. Let's pick up with this with my panel. Fear has returned to the streets, but do you think the UK is tough enough on terror? Right, well, let's see. What do they think? What do you guys think?
Well, I think we need to be tough on the causes of terror and indeed terror. And indeed, I think it's worth emphasising this is an alleged terrorist incident. Obviously, there's a suspect in custody. We know very little, of course, about this individual at the moment. We know more about the taxi driver, who has been, of course, hailed as a hero. But I think just what those pictures show, I mean, whatever the intent, is just how potentially worse this incident could have been. I mean, it's understood that the car was on its way to a Remembrance Sunday event. It's actually the first time in 2 years, because of COVID restrictions, that people have been able to gather in mass crowds and actually pay their respects to the fallen and those who've given service and the ultimate sacrifice for our country. So it could have been a really sickening outturn. And as it is, the fact he was then on the way to a maternity hospital, again, without engaging in too much conjecture, that just horrifies me, the thought of somebody actually looking then to target the future of our country, having been very unsuccessful in trying to bomb a commemoration ceremony, which is all about our past.
Well, I think it's really important what you say about the causes of terror, because if we look at the life trajectory of these terrorists, what do they have in common? They're men, they're young men. Many of them, most of them, have been radicalised through the internet, which is not adequately policed. We talk about policing the streets and policing terrorism, but that's a really important place to start. But there's also a brilliant book by the feminist writer Joan Smith, Homegrown, where she looks at the lives of these terrorists, those that we know about, and how they behaved and how their behaviour escalated through their youth and into early adulthood. And there's a link of really serious domestic abuse and violence against women there. And also, if we look at the figures of women who've died as a result of domestic violence, this year alone, 122 women have died at the hands of former or current male partners. That is what I would also describe as terrorism.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And I think one thing that we need to look at here is the importance of having a really well-funded police system. We need well-funded police forces. We've been cutting back on budgets for policing year upon year upon year. And the reality is that the more you cut back on funds, the more you cut back on budgets, it's going to be more and more difficult for the police to actually, how can I put this, look at these people, track them. Because if you're not properly funded, then one or two of them are going to slip through the net, as we saw here.
But there's so many of them now. I mean, and it's not possible for the police to just literally follow all of them and find out, what they're all doing. I don't know whether this person was on their radar. We don't know enough at the moment. But I mean, the point of this is, what do we do? So others have been put into custody, and they're talking to others who may well have been involved in this. If they have been involved in this, what do we do with them? Do they just go to prison, right? And a lot of the time they're radicalised there as well. So what?
Well, I think it's building on something that Julie said about, we've got to go for some of the deep-seated root causes of this. What is it about 21st century Britain where, OK, we don't know enough about this particular suspect, so let's not go down that track. But we do know from some of these previous incidents where, whether it's right-wing extremism or whether it's so-called Islamic extremism, often these are perpetrated by individuals who are British citizens. They have been educated here, they've grown up here, perhaps they have grown up in a culture of misogyny, perhaps they have grown up in a culture of domestic
Perhaps they haven't.
violence. Perhaps they haven't. And, you know, it's not about, in a sense,
really.
you know, looking for excuses for what are, you know, clearly, where convicted, heinous crimes. But I do think we've got to have that conversation about what is it about our education system, about, you know, the way in which communities rub along together or don't rub along together, that we've literally got somebody who feels that on probably one of the most important days in our calendar, where we reflect as a nation on those who've themselves lost their lives through the ultimate sacrifice of serving our country over many, many decades, that, you know, they feel such hatred in their hearts that potentially they can get into a taxi with an improvised explosive device with only one intent in mind, and that is to cause terror, maim, bloodshed and murder on our streets.
I mean, I heard what you said, but I don't think that you can actually really stop these people from behaving in this way. There will always be people like this, and it doesn't take many of them to cause mass destruction, does it really? I mean, if you look at things like, for example, the Twin Towers or any of those things, it's a very small amount of people that can cause a lot of damage. So once we have this in our sights and we do maybe invest more in the police, of course, there will be people that we will arrest under the Terrorism Act, as these 4 have been apprehended under this at the moment. So what do we do? How do we rehabilitate these people?
Sometimes rehabilitation isn't an option. It's always there on the table, isn't it? We need to contain very dangerous people. We need to know who is a danger and how long we need to contain them for. For example, John Warboys, the black cab rapist, who has, we estimate, raped hundreds of women. The police, of course, who are not fit for purpose when it comes to investigating many of these crimes, decided that they believed him and not his victims. So opportunities were lost. He then gets sentenced for a small number of the sexual offences that he carried out because the Crown Prosecution Service did not throw the book at him. He's then up for parole, and we all know what happened there. He duped the parole board, a panel of experts, who believed him when he said that he was rehabilitated, he'd been on a sex offender course, and he was fit to be let out into the wider community. Well, clearly he wasn't, because he'd shown no remorse, and he was about to go out and doubtless commit further crimes. So what we should do is contain him, and we should contain those people that are not safe to be out on the streets and mixing with other people, but we need to know who they are.
That's expensive. I mean, I know you've got experience of things like, what about, I mean, for a terrorist, I don't even think the death penalty would be something that they would, you know, be afraid of, because ultimately they are trying to kill themselves and others.
Well, it's not a deterrence. It's not a deterrence anyway.
That would be something that would, you don't think the death penalty is a deterrent?
Well, the death penalty isn't a deterrence. There are actually... There were more murders per capita when we had the death penalty in this country that was abolished, as we know, eventually in the 60s, than we've had since. Also, I mean, I've been to Florida and actually investigated issues to do with death row and the death penalty. And I mean, the hypocrisy is astounding amongst people who drive around in cars with anti-abortion stickers because life is so sacred, but they decide that they're going to fry someone who may or may not be either fit for rehabilitation or even guilty. And it's an inhumane response to what should be about containment and not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. We're not the Old Testament. We should have a fair and open justice system. And if that means keeping dangerous people away from the general public until they can prove otherwise, then so be it. And I hear what you're saying about expense, but so is putting people to death.
Why? They're not paying for them once.
If you actually look at what the states in the US, for example, what it costs to go through appeals to make sure, which they can never ever be sure of, that the process has been rigorous. If you think about the just and proper protests about this barbaric act, you know, you can't just put people to death because you decide that this is just punishment, because they've taken a life. It's absolutely against every facet.
In a case, so I hear you, there are miscarriages of justice, and that cannot happen if you have something like the death penalty. But what if, in some of the cases, say, you know that they have absolutely carried out that act simply because there's recorded evidence and everything else like that? would that still not be acceptable?
Absolutely not. The death penalty is barbaric and it has no place in any democratic society.
I really agree with you, Julie. Another thing is as well, these people want to die. That's what they want. Yeah, that's what they want. Otherwise, why would you strap a bomb to yourself? So, number one, you're giving them what they want. And number two, and more importantly, you're turning these people into martyrs. Because the moment the state executes them, every one of these preachers who goes out and spreads hatred and all the rest of it and radicalises people will go, look, they killed one of ours.
So what would you say the punishment would be? Because Julie suggests that they should stay in prison and be locked up. But as we know, in prison they get radicalised. I mean, they spend... We know that this is a breeding ground to create better, newer terrorists.
Prison reform.
We need prison reform and we need better funded prisons.
In what way? When you say reform?
Well, first of all, our prison system does not work. There are some people that we need to keep away, as I've said, from the general public. They're dangerous. We really should be emptying our prisons of everyone but those people. We should be thinking about other responses to dealing with people who commit crimes out of desperation, out of addiction, out of a lack of choice. We put people in prison still for being picked up repeatedly on prostitution charges when these women are the most desperate in society.
Also for not paying the TV licence.
Well, we put people in prison for being poor. We put poor people in prison. The other point, of course, about the death penalty and about undue punishment, because I think our system should be about containment, not punishment, or rehabilitation if possible, is that disproportionate numbers of very poor black people who can't afford legal representation because our legal aid is being squeezed into almost nothing. If we take the lesson from the states, in those states, such as Florida and Texas, where they do put people to death, death row is full of very poor, disenfranchised, mentally unwell people of colour. It's a disgrace.
I'm going to have to... I hear that and I think, yeah, but just if there are more black people committing the crime, then you don't want to say, oh, well, we'll better balance it out with some white people because we've got more black people.
No.
I'm just sorry. So I'm just saying that I hear what you're saying, but if they are disproportionately carrying out the crimes, and I know American justice system is like, I wouldn't want to be arrested in that place because I think they are. There is a lot of racism in terms of their whole force and that. But the point of it is that if disproportionately there are more black people committing those crimes, you don't need to balance it out with white people.
Yeah. Who would even suggest that? If you take a white man, for example, and his black counterpart, the black person will absolutely be way more likely to end up with a long prison sentence and or the death penalty than his white counterpart. That's the point.
But back to the key point, though, which I think you launched, was would the death penalty act as a deterrent, in this case, for example, of preventing alleged terrorism, or indeed real terrorism, where it's been convicted in the past. And as Julie said, there isn't a shred of evidence that suggests that those countries, there's 53 countries now that still have the death penalty. There was a major study in the US in 2012, by an independent research think tank that found that those states in the United States that have the death penalty, not all do, but they had very similar homicide and murder rates. So there's no evidence that there's a causal link between having the death penalty and reducing, for example, murder and homicide. And I think, although perhaps you might gloss over it, but actually I think it is important that advances in, for example, DNA evidence. Again, another study in the US has found that since 1992, 20 people have been wrongly convicted and murdered, essentially, by the state. And DNA evidence has found them to be innocent. I mean, that's 20 people too many, surely.
But we're going backwards there, and we have that technology now, so moving forward, that won't happen, right? So, I mean, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, it may act as a deterrent, and I think we can get statistics to literally prove anything. Well, you can get statistics to show that. Do the statistics include the fact that there may be more people carrying guns? So that could increase the death rate, irrespective of whether there is a capital punishment there or not. There are so many other things that you can factor in to disprove those statistics.
But surely it's not about numbers, it's about what is a just society, what's ethical, what's right. And we can't justify the taking of a life in response to a crime, even when we're talking about the taking of a life. I came to feminism through looking at the way that the police and the media responded to the so-called Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, and I still wouldn't have wanted him to have the death penalty.
I beg to differ on that one. Do it myself. No, joking. Sorry, I'm joking. I'm just joking. Don't take that seriously. Coming up, people in Wales will need to use their NHS COVID passes to enter cinemas and theatres from today. But should they be introduced everywhere? More on that after this.
On Brazier at 8, as the threat level rises, does the Liverpool attack signal the beginning of a new terror campaign? Also, is the media avoiding difficult questions about violent jihadism? And as migrants mass on the Polish border, how do we stop terrorists hiding amongst legitimate asylum seekers? That's Brazier from 8.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
So welcome back to Dewbs and Co with me, Nana Akua. Now, how do you feel about Wales' decision to ask people to show COVID passes at cinemas, theatres and concert halls? The move, which doesn't yet apply to the hospitality industry, has sparked anger amongst some who gathered outside the Assembly building in Cardiff over the weekend. The Welsh Beer and Pub Association has gone as far as saying it's a concerning time because pubs and restaurants fear that they might be next on the hit list. Panel, what do you think? Were we right to do this, or should the rest of the UK even follow?
No, it's a dreadful idea.
Why?
It's a dreadful, dreadful idea. And I'm going to attack it from a civil liberties point of view and when it comes to data. And I'll give you an example. My girlfriend is from New York. She went back to New York and she was, everywhere in New York is a vaccine passport. Now, she went to go into a conference. She walked into the conference centre. They said, "Madam, could you show your vaccination status?" She said, "No problem." She goes, "Oh, by the way, we're also going to need to take your temperature." She said, "Not a problem." She went, she put her face next to a scanner. They took her temperature. They also scanned her face. She went, "Hang on a second. I did not give you permission to scan my face. What is happening to that data?" This is just another attempt for the government to have a data grab. They've already grabbed our data once through the pandemic.
Oh,
nobody talks about this. They got rid of cash. They've got rid of cash. Cash now no longer... Cash. Right, OK, well, you don't, but I used to carry cash because I didn't like my data being tracked. They can now track our data far more effectively because nobody uses cash, and now this is going to be another attempt for them to track our data.
Can I ask you, have you got a mobile phone?
Yes, I do.
Well, they're tracking you there, so what's the problem?
Well, because I don't want another way for them to track me.
Well, that's enough, isn't it? I mean, look, well, listen, I'll tell you what, you've got your mobile phone, I presume you've got a car, right?
No.
You haven't got a car?
No, I live in London, and I'm green.
You have a house?
No. I'm a millennial. Of course I don't have a house.
Well, of course you don't have a house. Well, it might not be your own, but you must live in one. You don't live in a tent, right?
No.
So
I
live in a house. You must pay council tax, right?
Yes, I do pay council.
Right, so they know you're there.
Right, OK, yes. Yes, but we're talking about medical data, Nana.
You have a GP?
Sorry?
Yeah? So
yes, I do.
There's an address there, right?
Right, yes.
So if all that's happened here is they have your data, they've just not joined the dots.
No.
Now, what do you think?
Well, look, there's one thing being identifiable through all of those means, living in a modern sort of democratic society. But I think what this is about is is it right that people should have to, in a sense, demonstrate their medical status for everyday access to goods and services? Now, Francis has executed the, the civil liberties argument. I would agree with that. But actually, coming back to the argument, I think, on very practical grounds, we have already, in the United Kingdom, they're mandatory in Scotland. I was in Glasgow weekend before last, went to a gig. Was my COVID pass checked? No, it wasn't. My ticket was scanned in, though, to make sure I'd paid to get into the venue. And people, and in fact, as I was going into the venue, I heard a wee Glaswegian say, oh, I bought my QR code on the internet for £2. So there's clearly, a whole industry, being both a formal one, where people are making a lot of money out of these COVID passes, and also, as ever, there's probably an underground industry as well, where people are still getting into gigs. And I thought the whole basis of these COVID passes anyway, the science behind them, was that people who are double vaccinated with a COVID pass were less likely to infect others or to get COVID. So it doesn't work, does it? The whole point of the COVID pass was to keep, if you like, the infectious and the infected away from the people who could not then infect others. It doesn't even work on those grounds.
Well, I mean, look, if people took it seriously, it might do. What do you think, Julie?
Absolutely. I don't have a problem with a vaccination pass. I have a huge problem with people that choose not to get vaccinated, because this is why we're in this mess.
Right.
And I absolutely think it's right what's happening in Austria, that people who are unvaccinated, there should be a lockdown, there should be a curfew on their freedom, because I hear what you're saying about the way that our medical status and the scrutiny into our medical status is an infringement of civil liberties and privacy. But this is about medical status that affects other people. You have the right to get COVID and die from it if this is what you really think. If you're willing not to be vaccinated, you have to also be willing to die from COVID and to become very sick from it.
Well, you've just come
I've just come from Italy, where every single place that I went, and I was there for work, so we're talking about buildings, we're also talking about restaurants in the evening where you have to show your vaccination status. And of course, you can't go into the country without that, and you can't come back in without proving it. But let's have a look at smoking in public buildings. The reason why we stopped it was because of the effect to other people. You can choose to smoke if you wish to, but if you're doing it in a place that affects other people, this is where their civil liberties are at risk from you.
But there are clear public health benefits of children and adults not...
not being vaccinated?
No, not consuming secondary smoke. That's why, I would support those public health measures that, for example, say that we don't have smoking in our pubs anymore, in our restaurants. But this is, where is the data and the science that says that the rationale behind the COVID passes actually is helping with, yes, it might be helping to coerce people into taking the jab if they don't want to have the jab.
Well, that's
clearly what's part of it. But
I hope so.
But that's
but that is helping. You've just answered your own question. You've said what is it that's helping?
But I object to that.
You've just answered it.
Yeah, but I object to that because we don't, for example, say to parents who don't want their children to have the MRA jab, right, we've got to stop your children from going to
some places
your child to go to school. But again, it's a slippery slope, isn't it?
Look what's happened
It's an
with
absolute
measles and other
slippery slope.
diseases. Look what's happened with those diseases. We'd actually got rid of these things, and now because people got scared or they were told something that wasn't quite true or read something on the internet, now things that no longer were a problem for us, polio, they're coming back because of this behaviour. Can you not see that this behaviour is creating pandemics that we have actually got rid of? And here we go, another one that we're trying to get rid of or trying to manage, and then there's a load of people who are saying, oh, I'm not going to take the vaccine, oh, you're taking away my civil liberties. And in the end, the very thing they're doing is creating the situation they're trying to avoid.
But there was data released recently in a report that was published in Bloomberg, which showed that actually the vaccines, they ameliorate the worst of the effects of the virus. Yeah, well, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I'm not denying that. But they would the report also showed that actually it didn't stop you passing on the virus.
No, but what is less likely, though? It reduces.
No, it doesn't. That's what it said when it came to the Delta variant. It said that it made no difference at all.
No, that's not right. No, can I just say that, because that's slight distortion. What it is that if you have the vaccine, you are less likely to catch the virus in the first place, right? So if you have the vaccine, you're less likely to catch it. Therefore, you're less likely to spread it if you're less likely to catch it. When you do catch it, however, even if you're vaccinated, yes, your viral load is about the same as somebody else who's unvaccinated. However, your viral load dips faster. Therefore, you are less infectious for less period of time than somebody who's unvaccinated. And that as a knock-on effect does help. And if you're saying it doesn't, then that's a nonsense.
Right, OK. But it's also, as well, you're looking at it and you're going, yes, but there's a lot of people in this country who have antibodies, who are more protected than if you get the vaccine. I think it's 26 times more likely. What do we do to those people?
We should factor that in. I mean, I think that should be part of the...
And also...
Isn't that part of it anyway? I mean, I thought that was something there where it checks antibodies.
Well, no. And also, as well, on the Politics for All account on Twitter last night, they were saying, and this is a reputable account, that the government are saying that if you get COVID, you no longer have to self-isolate. So,
I mean, I don't know about that.
Government's one thing. I mean, I was double vaccinated. Early in September, I tested positive for COVID. I got it off somebody that had tested positive for COVID, so I went along and tested. And I had the night before been at an event, hello everyone that was there, with 400 people, many of whom I was quite close to. I was careful. And then I went into studios, I went into... all kinds of situations where it would be very easy to pass on this virus. Not one person caught that virus from me.
Wow.
And that is because of it's less likely that you pass it on when you've been vaccinated.
That's absolutely true. And listen, whilst we're on the issue of COVID, have you seen the new Tesco ad? Just take a look at this.
Need a little help?
Oh, don't you worry, my love. This year, nothing's stopping me.
Be quarantined.
Next.
So that's Santa. Well, to be honest, he's showing his COVID pass, but it hasn't gone down well on his vaccination certificate. This has not gone down well with the anti-vaxxers, no surprises there. They're now threatening to boycott the store for featuring the double-jabbed Santa. Panel, what do you think? I'll just say what I think first. If the anti-vaxxers don't want to go to Tesco, I'm absolutely going there, because at least I know people there will be jabbed. Yeah. So do what you like. That's what I think. But what do you think?
Well, I won't be tearing up my Tesco club card, but, you know, I look at that advert and I think Freddie Mercury would probably turn in his grave at the sort of corporate virtue signalling that is clearly evident in that advert. I mean, it's great to see, by the way, that we're going to be having a Christmas where it's snowing, according to that advert, so that's good at least.
It's unusual.
It is unusual with all this global warming going on. But, no, look, I just think... I don't know, Francis, you'll probably have a joke on this.
I think it's brilliant. I think actually halfway through Lord of the Rings, Gandalf should talk about how he uses protection and pulls out a packet of Durex.
Exactly.
What else? Frodo, you know, if you want to protect yourself from most STIs, use these bad boys.
Well, hang on. No,
I mean, it's patronising. It's patronising. It's patronising.
I don't think
that's it. That's the word I was looking for.
Great. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't like the way.
The ad's rubbish. But I absolutely agree with you. Listen, I'm going to Tesco's from now on, right through the festive period, so I can avoid those bloody anti-vaxxers.
Apologies for that language there, just in case anyone...
Excuse me,
Well, look, you could just say... Unprotected sex has killed way more people than COVID.
Well, listen, that's because we've had the vaccine.
What, vaccine against HIV/AIDS? I said...
about death, though, aren't we?
Yeah, we're talking about... Francis.
Sorry?
That's whataboutery, I agree with you. Unprotected sex causes untold death, misery, and
yes,
the like.
Absolutely.
But so we should be dealing with educating people about that.
Absolutely, we should be dealing with educating. What we shouldn't have is companies virtue signalling this nonsense.
Well, I mean, fair enough, but the principle behind it, what they're saying is they're basically, in a sense, endorsing the fact that people who have been double jabbed are welcome there and they're happy with it. And Santa himself is double jabbed. That ultimately, I don't know whether they should be involved in that, but I don't mind it.
Couldn't corporates just stay out of these big sort of contested political debates? Just get on with selling the goods.
I agree.
Yeah,
so we could all have a nice Christmas.
Well, I don't mind it. I don't mind it, frankly, because I think it's OK. I'm quite happy to go to places where people are double jabbed. And anyway, remember, we are talking about a very serious, deadly disease. Even though people say, oh, it's such a small proportion of people who die, there are many people who didn't die that are in a very bad way from this thing. So, you know, that can't be the only focus. Now, Farage will be coming up at the end of the hour, so do stay with us. But coming up, new students at a college in Cambridge University are being forced to complete an anti-racism workshop covering issues like white privilege. But is that fair? More on that after this.
Coming up Tuesday on Dan Wootton Tonight, Strictly Come Dancing head judge Shirley Ballas joins me live to put to rest behind-the-scenes rumours about the hit BBC show. I'll break down the day's top stories and give you a first look at the newspaper front pages with my superstar panel, the journalist and author Rebecca Reid, conservative commentator Calvin Robinson, and the former editor of the Daily Star, Dawn Neeson. Olympic hero and record-breaking sprinter Ewan Thomas has an inside look at what's kicking off in the world of sport, including whether David Beckham is a human rights hypocrite. Political commentator Darren Grimes delivers his uncompromising take in The Outsider. Plus, I'll crown a Greatest Britain and Union Jackass, and you'll get to voice your opinion on one of the day's biggest talking points in The Clash. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, 9 p.m, Monday to Thursday on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
If you've just tuned in, where have you been? Welcome. This is Dewbs & Co with me, Nana Akua. Now, us Brits hate being forced to do things, but some students at Cambridge University aren't even getting a choice in the matter when it comes to racism. New students at the Waltham College have been sent an email saying it will be mandatory for them to take part in an anti-racism workshop, which covers issues such as microaggressions, whiteness and privilege. The Sunday Telegraph caught wind of it and reported the online session will highlight how everyday interactions leave some people feeling devalued. You speak good English being one example. Panel, should these workshops be held at universities?
No, they shouldn't be held at universities. It's a very binary way to approach race. For example, I'm a white man. My mother is a woman of colour from Latin America, Venezuela. My grandfather was an Arab. Race is complex. Just because somebody appears to be white doesn't mean they can't be an ethnic minority. Right. The way we look at it is so binary. If you want a more cohesive society, just encourage people to go out and mix with different people, talk to different people, and maybe just treat others like you'd like to be treated.
That would be quite simple, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, alas, it's another example, I'm afraid, of the so-called anti-racists who appear to be the new racists. You know, they see racism absolutely everywhere. They, you know, remind whole racial, social groups with immutable characteristics that they should wake up in the morning and feel guilty for the fact they're, in this case, white. And in any case, you know, you would expect at an academic institution where critical race theory is not fact. It shouldn't be taught as fact. A government minister has said that critical race theory is not fact. So why do we have, you know, a pretty elitist institution here
Well, I
that,
think you said it there. An elitist institution.
frankly, could be doing more to look at, you know, why, for example, people from, you know, working class backgrounds don't always get a fair shout at
And
some
why
of
they've
these
hardly
courses.
got any black students.
Well, indeed.
I think class is a really important issue. I think it's important to understand what racism is and how to be anti-racist. And I think that's why the word microaggression really worries me, because it means nothing and everything. And I think it's a waste of an opportunity to actually talk about what racism is, the history of the empire, Britain's role, colonialism, real, tangible issues that can affect the lives of people who are actually at the bottom of the pile and who are discriminated against. But you're right, elite institutions never deal with issues of class, and I think at that university it's particularly pertinent that there are so few working class people of any ethnicity that go through their doors.
I have to say that being somebody of colour, but just to remind you all, we are actually all one race. We came from Africa, so to be fair, we've all got a mix of everything. So I think we create this construct of racism to suit some people because they kind of like it there. But when I hear people talk about white privilege, and if someone says to me, oh, they have white privilege, I actually think that person is racist. Because if you're telling me that you're privileged because you're white, and I'm supposed to agree with that, that doesn't work for me. We are educating people to believe, and we are continuing to perpetuate this particular environment to keep it this way, and there are certain people who will enjoy it. So when other broadcasters have said things like, oh, it's the sort of white saviour mentality and that sort of thing, where we're going to come and save you, or you poor black people, or this is the sort of narrative that I believe these kind of things reinforce. And I think really and truly we need to stop doing this. We need to stop talking about colour, start talking about what people can bring to the table, what are your skill sets, what can you do, and work, and as you said, treat others as you'd like to be treated.
Absolutely. There is nothing more antagonistic than saying to somebody who is white and from deprived communities in the north, like I used to teach in Cornwall, real deprivation, generations of people living in poverty, going up to that type of person and going, you know what, mate, you're privileged. It's just abhorrent, it's vile and it's wrong.
Well, it's not even true, is it, at the end of the day? Because if you look at those that are the high achievers, it's those from the Asian part of the world. So also Chinese people, these kind of people are
West African girls.
And African girls are the top achievers. And then at the bottom of the food chain is actually white male.
But that said,
I'm not sure that's true. I don't think that white male. I think his black counterpart is.
And there was
white working class boys,
also Caribbean boys, I think it was. But it was white males who were near the bottom of the food chain.
But it's like for like, isn't it?
White males were the bottom. I think
But surely it's not about a person in the government who is from an African nation compared to a white impoverished man in Cornwall. You have to look at like for like, and of course it's a disadvantage. Of course it is.
Which one? What is a disadvantage?
If you're talking about like for like,
what,
I'm sure that
black is a disadvantage.
Well, I'm sure that in Cornwall, where you were talking, Francis, about impoverished communities, a black person within that impoverished community would have an additional disadvantage.
I wouldn't.
I speak as someone who comes from an impoverished community where I've seen the racism, grown up amongst the racism.
I wouldn't agree with that because I was born in the 70s. I'm first generation black in this country, and I actually notice it's the content of your character, not the colour of your skin, that will actually move you forward. If you move away from that, then you can actually teach people who you are, and that's life, honestly and genuinely. We've got to move on.
You've got to move on.
We've got to look at this, and finally, we did speak to the college, by the way, and they declined to give us a statement. And finally, Italy's top appeals court has told a 32-year-old man that he does not have the right to seek any more financial support from his father. Now, this story is making the headlines in Italy, as just like in the UK, millions rely on the bank of mum and dad. You remember Prince Harry complaining because he'd spent his millions that his mum left him, and also his dad, he said he wasn't giving him any more money. The man in question, though, has been living with his mother in Sicily since she and his father divorced several years ago. But now, monthly payments to help the pair have been stopped. the judges said that the unemployed man should not abuse the right to be supported by a parent beyond reasonable limits of time and measure. So it's got me thinking, should there be an age limit on the bank of mum and dad?
Well, it's a sad reflection of our society that we even talk about the BOMD, which I understand is now, if it was a real bank, would be the 9th biggest lender in the United Kingdom. It actually could be competing with some of the high street banks. And as someone that grew up without a mum and dad, I grew up in foster care, know absolutely what it's like not to have parents to go to tap them up for the rental deposit. I now chair a charity that helps care leavers with things like rental deposits, the sort of things actually that the banker mum and dad helps out with. That said, though, I've got huge sympathy for anyone under the age of 40 who hasn't got a banker mum and dad, who can't get on the housing ladder. Liam Halligan, brilliant economist and presenter here at GB News, his book Home Truth, he makes the point that in the 1980s, if you want average income, it took 20 months to save up for a housing deposit. It now takes 20 years. So there's a generational, a whole generation that's just locked out of economic advantage.
I mean, I can't add to that. I agree with every single word that you say. This is actually about those very privileged kids who can go to their parents and say, buy me a car, help me get on the housing ladder. This isn't actually about those that are forced to stay at home and have no independence, and I feel desperately sorry for them.
And it's also, as well, the realisation that it's, a lot of people on the left, which I am, love to bash the Tories, but Labour have also helped to create this problem. It's been the Tories, it's been Labour not replenishing the council house stock, not relaxing legislation in order that we can build on brownfield sites and greenfield sites. And we are where we are now. And the only way for a person of my age or younger to get on the housing ladder is to look at your parents or to look at your grandparents, and if they, when they go, then you'll be able to do it. Until then, you can't do anything.
That would be a fine thing with my parents. Because my dad, if you ask him for money, he'll make you feel so bad. And when he did lend me £1,000 one time, he was waiting for it back.
He charged you interest.
To be fair, and when when his time is up, he'll leave us debts, I'm sure.
You should run a bank.
Well, apparently,
bank manager.
Well, apparently 5% of the banker mum and dad that are doing all the lending, they charge interest to their kids. There you go. There's a lot of entrepreneurial.
Good. Makes sense.
Exactly the same thing myself. I can't imagine though. I think as well as a cultural thing. So obviously I was born in this country, but my parents came from Africa. So there, I think is this sort of banker mum and dad thing is not something that would be you wouldn't expect that.
No.
That's not the kind of parentage that they are. They're not like that.
Stand on your own 2 feet.
Stand on your own 2 feet. That's the way it goes. But listen, it's been such a pleasure meeting my panel today. Do you have kids?
3.
Are you paying for them? Are you going to pay their mortgages or buy them a house?
Well, given that they're dependent on me at the moment, I think that's a fair enough deal. But they're not yet over the age of 18. We'll see.
Dog and a cat, massive vets bills, what can I say?
Very, very sensible, actually, to be fair.
All my money goes on rent, Nana.
Does it?
Yeah.
Poor
40%.
Well, listen, we've had quite a few messages in. Let's see what let's go for. Well, we talked to the explosion in Liverpool, and David says, don't let them in the first place. We're talking about terrorists, and he's saying that there are thousands of people just waiting to get into the UK. Plus, we have thousands already here waiting to get on the streets. Toughen up before it gets too late. Problem with that, David, is a lot of them were actually British. They're born here. Pauline says, every day we let more potential terrorists enter illegally. That's true. We do need to police our borders. I would agree with that. But again, a lot of these are homegrown. On COVID passports, Kevin says it's a disgraceful idea. It makes no sense. There is no immunity from the virus. Jabbed people still contract and transmit the virus. It's pure discrimination and nothing else. Richard says they don't bother me. 2 is a crowd, so I don't care if anything anyway. Well, listen, I've got to say a big thank you to my panel. It's been a pleasure as ever. I look forward to you as well. Thank you to you for your company as well. I'll be back tomorrow at the same time, same place, looking after Dewbs & Co. Nigel Farage is coming up next.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hello again. Things turning quite windy overnight across northern Britain, and that'll stay that way through Tuesday as well. There'll be a bit of rain for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but most of England and Wales will be dry thanks to this area of high pressure. It's further north, though, where this low and this set of weather fronts is approaching. Ahead of all of that, we've got a dying weather front that's still been making for quite a dank and drizzly day over parts of northern England and Wales, and still some rain and drizzle here through the evening, but it continues to fizzle out. Further south, we could see some fog patches where we have some clearer skies, and that could take a while to clear on Tuesday. Meanwhile, that weather system really pepping the winds up across the far northwest. Quite mild here, but elsewhere a bit of a chilly start to Tuesday. Mostly grey starts, some places seeing a bit of sunshine. A bit of fog in the south will take a while to clear away. Could stick around certainly through the morning rush hour. It's going to turn wet across western Scotland and for a time through Northern Ireland. Spell of rain here through the middle of the day. That'll be followed by some lively showers too across the far northwest. But for most of England and Wales, it'll stay dry. Yes, lots of cloud, but where we see some brightness, it's going to be pretty mild, 12, 13 degrees. Through Tuesday evening, that rain will trickle into parts of northern England and Wales for a time, but again, it kind of fizzles out. Lots of showers will come into Northern Ireland and western Scotland, some snow on the tops of the mountains across Scotland. Staying windy here as well. That will again be a feature of the weather on Wednesday. Quite a blustery day with showers for northern and western Scotland. The odd one for Northern Ireland, northwest England, but again, many southern and eastern areas dry on Wednesday, probably a bit brighter as well, particularly in the south. Better chance of seeing some sunshine, but a little bit cooler with temperatures back closer to average, but still double digits for most. There will be a fairly brisk breeze blowing, though, on Wednesday. It turns milder again through the rest of the week with a lot of cloud, some rain at times in the northwest, but a lot of dry weather as well. Goodbye.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch a